This is the Canon R8. It's not the newest camera by any means, but it is one of the most interesting ones in Canon's mirrorless lineup. It's time to find out whether this camera is worth the $1,300 price tag.
The first thing that strikes me is this camera's body. It's quite thin and very light, but it still has a nice grip that fits comfortably in my hand, unlike its smaller counterparts, the R50 and the R10, where it's a little bit shallow. This small size combined with a tiny lens like the RF 28mm is just a perfect travel size camera, and it kind of even competes with something the size of like a Fuji or a Leica. Additionally, the R8 has all of the ports that you might expect from a professional grade mirrorless hybrid camera, including the all-important controller input, which I use all the time to take things like thumbnails and time lapses. Interestingly, on the R8, the body has a separate switch to flip between photo mode and video mode. This is actually really awesome because on my R6, it's a part of this multi-function dial, and it's just kind of a pain in the butt. One thing I'm not a huge fan of is this D-pad on the back here. It just feels kind of plasticky and cheap, even though it works just fine. Of course, the R8 has one of those fully articulating flip-out screens, which is great for vlogging, and this is just kind of standard on all Canon mirrorless cameras nowadays, except maybe the R100. Overall, I'd say that the R8 has a really nice set of manual controls, bordering on professional grade. It's just missing a few of those little touches that are found on cameras like the R6 Mark II and up. It's what's contained within the body which is most important though, and this is a full-frame 24 megapixel sensor that's the same as Canon's R6 Mark II, which is a ridiculously awesome sensor and produces amazing photos.
When it comes to low light performance, I probably wouldn't push it past 25,600 ISO. I mean, unless you don't mind noise and you want to use some like AI denoising algorithms, that's totally cool. I'm definitely seeing a lot of speckles, a lot of noise here once we get up to the 25,600. The R8's burst speed is up to 40 frames per second. That's faster than I'm filming right now, and it is more than enough for everybody except maybe the most elite wildlife and sports photographers. To turn this mode on, you have to go into your settings and toggle on high speed RAW. It can sustain these bursts for around 50 RAW photos in a row before it needs to kind of take a break and cool down. After that photo burst has been taken, it bins all of them together so that you can select your keepers later on. It's super nice. It also has pre-shooting capabilities, which means that you can prep the camera to take a photo by just half pressing the shutter button, and then on a full press, it'll take a photo, but it'll save 0.5 seconds worth of photos before that one was shot. That way you never miss any of the action. All told, the R8 is a powerhouse of a photo camera by any estimation, but how are its video capabilities? One thing that's nice about the R8 is that being a full frame camera, it gives that super wide field of view that is so important if you're vlogging or you're shooting real estate videos, that sort of thing. It shoots up to 4K 60 FPS 10-bit footage in C-Log 3, which is really nice, but it also downsamples that 4K from its 6K sensor, which means that it gets a little bump in sharpness. The problem with oversampling is that all of that computation can really produce a lot of heat. So I'm just gonna do some basic regular B-roll shooting down here. It's kind of a cool blue hour in the morning, and get some of those shots, see if overheating becomes a problem in sort of your normal use cases. And for this test, we're shooting 60 frames per second, Canon Log 3 4K. I haven't run into any overheating issues yet just filming it. It's been probably like 30 minutes, but I started with a full charge and I'm already getting a low
Low battery warning, which is another thing I wanted to talk about with this camera. But first, let's wrap up talking about overheating, because I don't want to go back to it. While I personally didn't run into any issues with overheating on the R8 in this sort of typical B-roll shooting scenario, Josh Satin made a really thorough review video of the overheating with 4K 60 and 4K 24. I'll link that below because I don't think I can do it better than he did, and obviously this was kind of inconclusive. Or at least it was helpful to know that if you're using it for normal B-roll shooting purposes, shouldn't be an issue, at least before this stupid battery indicator is. I'd heard about the battery life problems with this camera before this, but it's an entirely different thing to experience it for yourself, and it kind of sucks. I also meant to bring another one of these batteries with me because I have more than one, and I totally forgot, which means according to the specs, I have only about an hour's worth of shooting before this battery dies, and that's in 4K 24. 4K 60 ate it up way faster than that. The issue is it runs on these little LPE17 batteries, which are nice and small and nice and light, but really don't supply a whole lot of power. So if you're a videographer, I'd recommend bringing at least 3 of these with you anytime you go on a shoot, maybe even like 4 to 5 if you're doing a wedding, just for safety. For photographers, it's not really as big of a deal because photography is much less power hungry than videography. On the bright side, Canon has removed that annoying 30-minute time limit found on their older mirrorless cameras like this R6 and the original R5. The R8 has a 120-minute time limit, which is great. Obviously, you're not going to get to that with this sort of battery, but if you plug it into wall power and you're doing something like a podcast, then you'll be limited to those 2 hours. Unsurprisingly, autofocus is really good on this camera. It should stick on and stay on because Canon has really perfected their autofocusing game. The R8 in particular has 1,053 autofocus points all the way across the sensor, which means whether I'm like way over here in the upper right or I'm coming way down here, it should be able to track me pretty well. You can switch the subject detection mode from people to animals to vehicles, and in photo mode, they have a new AI servo mode, which will switch your AI or your focus point from being a one-shot focus to a servo focus that'll track any subjects that they recognize are starting to move throughout your frame.
When it comes to image stabilization, I would say in today's terms, the R8 is pretty standard. I mean, it smooths things out a good amount, but you still get some weird wobble when you're not trying to be super smooth yourself. It's not gonna act as a gimbal, except if you're doing sort of simple panning shots, it works really well. So don't expect anything crazy out of it, but it will live up to expectations. I did just run out to do a test on vlogging stabilization though. These are the results.
This is walking and vlogging with no image stabilization on the camera. This is vlogging and walking with regular image stabilization on. And this is with the enhanced image stabilization on. Notice the bump in. I'm at the same focal length. I'm at 15 millimeters. It just crops in a lot more so it can stabilize better.
Personally, I think you can see a little bit of added stabilization when you have the regular stabilization on. The enhanced stabilization was a little bit weird because it made it stable at some periods and then it would kind of switch over real quick and kind of like jolt the camera. And I also just don't like how much it zooms in. I think the best route to go when talking about vlogging with the R8 is just the regular image stabilization. And I didn't notice any of that weird wobble along the edges of the frame that you got with some of Canon's earlier cameras like the R5 and the R6. The R8 is an incredible camera. Its battery life really holds it back, but it's not too big of a deal as long as you're okay with hauling around a bunch of extra batteries. So for that reason, I would say it's an excellent choice for anybody other than pro videographers, because as a professional videographer, when I'm doing client shoots and that sort of thing, I just can't swap batteries that frequently, and the scare of having batteries die on a shoot is just too much for me to handle. So I wouldn't go with this if you're doing like weddings and that sort of thing. Otherwise, it's incredible. But even though it's priced pretty reasonably, the R8 is still a lot more expensive than some of its cousins in Canon's mirrorless lineup. That is the R10 and the R50. If you want to check those out and see if they maybe fit your budget a little bit better, you should watch this video to see where they compare well with the R8 and where they would fall short.